So welcome to Super Bowl Sunday here at One Church, our tailgate Sunday, better known as the Super Bowl the Lions should have been in. I'm not bitter still, I promise. I've had 2 weeks of crying. But we're going to celebrate a little bit. We're going to talk about Acts, but I need to set the tone for you. So to understand, I give a little bit of, sorry, I don't know what you're saying because So elementary age kids, you're welcome. Andrea has a lesson for you. If you want to come over into the room, she has a little lesson for you. If any of the elementary kids or kiddos want to join in on that. So I started with the story of you need to understand that, to understand a little bit of this church plant, understand this church, that Jamie and I have definitely an interesting relationship in our marriage, and it's stuff like that where she looks at me and I'm supposed to know what's going on and I don't have a clue. That's just a nutshell of our marriage. But so much of our marriage, when we were first dating, and I've shared this story before, somebody has said to Jamie and I, you guys need to be very careful because you are snarky with each other, and that's going to cause issues in your marriage. And I'm pretty sure that followed up by a snarky comment by both of us to that person. And we just find a way to survive in the middle of that. So that story to share, this last week, I was kind of asking Jamie, I said, hey, this Acts sermon series, be honest with me. Like, what are the good, what are the bad? And those that have been here, we've been going through the book of Acts and kind of talking about the early church. And I said, what's the good and the bad? And Jamie said, kind of like all good, supportive wives, like this is going well. And then she just kind of stared at me. And I said, okay, what's the bad? And she goes, well, I just felt like there'd be more questions. You said, can I ask you a few questions? I felt like you should have more questions. So we had this kind of like back and forth. So today's sermon is dedicated to my wife. Today is all about as many questions as possible. So it's Super Bowl Sunday. We're going to have fun. We're going to start. I have 2 volunteers. Danny Marilette, come on up. And John, come on up. Come here. If you've ever watched Whose Line Is It Anyways, there's one of my favorite parts of Whose Line Is It Anyways is there's a show on there called Questions Only. So because it's Super Bowl Sunday and you are 2 competitive men, I have a gift card for Buffalo Wild Wings, and you guys are all, Drew Carey where he buzzes the horn if they fail. So your entire conversation has to be said with only questions. We're going to do 2 out of 3 here. So you got to scoot a little closer here.
Why?
And you're on to it already. So round 1, Dan, you can start.
Was it John's fault that the Lions lost the Super Bowl?
Why would it be John's fault?
Well, he did play the fight song and everything, so, I do kind of blame him.
Okay, it's tough. It's tough. So that's why we're doing 2 out of 3. Okay, so you start here, John.
Why would you be sad if the Lions didn't make it to the Super Bowl?
I feel like a Jeopardy.
Yeah. Why would I be sad? Because
Buffalo.
Have you seen them in your lifetime?
The Lions, no.
See, Jamie, questions
The question
are hard.
was the Lions.
See, Jade would destroy you.
That's fine. Then can I tag her in? Is this
You gotta
like?
put the microphone.
No, I can talk.
No, you need.
No, can I
Okay,
phone
so
a friend?
round 3. This is for B-dubs. Danny, you're up.
Do you even like B-dubs?
Do I like B-dubs?
Yeah, that was the question.
I don't know.
Oh!
That was...
Was that? No, 3 mic. You talk.
Okay.
Why does John need a mic?
I don't know. But the winner.
Congratulations.
Congrats. Okay, am I fine using this guy? Okay. So, thank you so much for playing our fun little game of questions only. Jamie, are we good with the questions today? Have we? Because if not, I got about 100 more questions. You're a little bitter? Oh, busy. I thought you bitter, busy, it's the same. So today's sermon, like I said, is dedicated to all sorts of questions. So as we dive into the book of Acts, we're doing chapters 18 through 22 today and kind of going through a little bit of this. And we are going to ask a bunch of questions about the book of Acts. But really the heart of this entire series is, again, the early church. We're discussing the early church, the pitfalls that they faced, the different situations they faced, but really just kind of talking about those questions that Paul asked us to ask ourselves. What is it that we're working on? What are we growing in? Where are we growing in that? So we're going to go into Acts 18 through 22. So Acts 18 starts off with some neat stories of Priscilla, Aquila, and these are two tent makers. So Paul joins them in the book in Corinth. First of all, you got to understand Corinth is the southern part of Greece there, if you can see on the map. Okay, so my best that I can tell you, I loved when I studied all of this to understand the book of, the city of Corinth is, the best I can tell you is it's kind of like Las Vegas. It was kind of the early Sin City. This was where it was a trade port. This is where a lot of guys came up and got off the boat and they were looking for love in all the wrong places. Is that a kid-friendly way to put that, right? Like, this was an entire city that was built off of debauchery, whatever you want to say, of just kind of, right, Las Vegas. Give you a little part of that. So Paul comes to visit here, and he runs into Priscilla and Aquila, who are two other tent makers, which is just pretty much he's doing life with them. And the reason why I love this part of 18 is to understand what Paul's going through. Is he's just this, instead of coming into a city like he had done so much in Acts and just saying, hey, this is who God is, and explaining to people, he's actually landing here just being a normal, everyday, average person. He's being a tent maker himself. That was what he was, so he's just leaning into that, and he's just doing life. And I love the part of this entire thing, because they meet Apollos, and Apollos is just a guy that is known in the Bible as just wanting and hunger for God. He understood God, but he just so much wanted that knowledge. So Paul's just doing life with them, but also teaching them about God. He's not doing it as, hey, let me come in and be a pastor. He's doing it just being like a coworker in that mentality. And to understand that. And it's so neat to see that in that growth that happens when we do life together. You've heard Jamie say, and I've stolen that sentence from her, about just doing life together. Growing back and forth and going through that, being in the same kids' sports or whatever it is, of what it is that we have in common, and we're just doing life together. We're growing, and hopefully you see God in me and I see God in you, in that growth that happens by just literally going through life together. And I was thinking of this, and as I was preparing for this sermon, this story just kept popping in my head. And I felt like the person that really hit home with that was, I shared a couple weeks ago about the funeral I did for Craig Baker, and to share that, and I really felt like that was doing life together. Craig was one of those guys that when you would see him at the gas station, he would stop and talk to you. When you saw him at different spots, he would just stop and encourage. He always had an encouraging word. It was never, well, I maybe should ask his family if it was different. But for me, it was always an encouraging word. It was always that, hey, I love what you're doing. I love this. I love, and just spurring on that. And it was never that he would like stop me and be like, hey, can I read? Can I pray with you? Can I do, like, it wasn't overly like what we Christianese, whatever you want to call that, right? It was just him growing and spurring, and you knew walking away from that conversation with him that you felt better about the things that you were doing. You had that positive interaction. And it was just doing life, right? Like, that's the point that Paul did here in Acts 18, is he just did life together. He spent, I believe, a year and a half at this point in Corinth just doing life with people and building into them. So my first question of the many questions for today, because it's question theme day, is this right here for you. What is God teaching you through each other? What is God teaching you by just spending time with each other? By right, like an interaction that you, whether it be at a speedway, whether it be we run into each other at a sporting event or whatever. My hope is that you walk away from an interaction with me feeling better about yourself. I know that I fail that. I know we don't have to have like event time here and say, here's all the times that John let me down. But right, like that's my hope for you, not because as a pastor, but just as a good human, as a Christian. My hope is that you walk away, and that should be our hope too, right? Like you walk away from an interaction with each other where you've grown to be a better person, you've grown in your faith, you've seen God, you've seen those moments where you see the light of Christ through my interaction with each other. So what is God teaching you through each other? Because that's the difference, right? Of like our church and what we built on is it's doing life together, it's growing, it's being something special. So hopefully our interaction, there's so much more there. So as we move into Acts 19, from that, we talks about the growth. The immense growth that was happening within the church and all that. And there's a really neat story in there that I've shared before that's just really powerful about all these prophets burning the books and it's not like the Bible books, it's the other books that are not God honoring, right? Like false idols and stuff like this. They burned the equivalent of millions of dollars of books because their lives had been transformed so much. In Acts 19, it's just this really neat story about all of this happening. But the point that I think is really interesting that jumped out to me this time when I read through it is that a riot happens afterwards. It talks about like all of these people that have come to know God and grown in their faith and so many cool things happening, but then a riot breaks out. And the riot breaks out because these false idols, these creators of false idols are mad at Paul because they literally have lost their livelihood. They used to make these little false idols, and they would make these and they would sell them, and now people aren't caring about false idols anymore. They are caring about God, so they're not buying this. So literally these people are irate at Paul because they're like, you literally took our livelihood away from us. We no longer, the false idol industry is dead. It would kind of be, the equivalent of if you were like making DVD players right now, right? Like, what do you mean streaming? Like they're irate with Paul about this entire thing. So my next question for you is simply this. What would you give up to have a better life? What is it that you can honestly look at and say, you know what, God, I really want to have a better life. I really want this. What is it that you're willing to give up? And my question out of this, it really hit home, and I shared back a few months ago about my impending surgery that's coming up. And the meeting I had with the doctor, and when I asked the doctor, he said, what is it that you're looking for? And I said, I just want to be able to walk without pain. I want to be able to pick stuff up without pain. I want to be able to do this, and my hip is I really want this to get fixed. And he's like, yeah, what else? You want a new car? $1 million, right? And I sat there and I'm like, no, I just want, I don't think I'm asking for a lot. And really, it's that entire thing of what would you give up? And I finally looked at him and I said, listen, I would, and I looked at the doctor rather emotional because those that know me, I get emotional, right? And I looked at the doctor and I said, I would give up everything. I'd give up my car, I'd give up my house, I'd give up all of this stuff. I didn't talk it over with Jamie first, but I said, I would give up all those things if you can take away this pain. And immediately when I said that, the doctor had a different tone in his voice. Because to that moment on, he realized how serious it was. And sometimes just giving up those things, that shows that seriousness. So sometimes that question is, what would you give up? If I could tell you, you could see the end result, what would you be willing to give up to have a better life, to honor God in that? We spend so much time getting caught up in the things of this world when God goes, there's so much more beyond this. So we move from 19 there into chapter 20. And it talks about Paul on his way to Greece. And I'll be honest, in this week's reading, this is the one that made me laugh probably the most. And Paul's on his way to Greece. And I love the story because it kind of gets glossed over that they talk about all the people that were with Paul as he's going back to Greece. And they go through different people that have followed him along his journey, right? He's making that big long map that we showed of all of his travels. And it's like one guy from this village, one guy from this city, one guy from here. They're all following him to learn from Paul, They're all following because there's this attraction to, I want to be more Christ-like. I want to be more like God. I want, I want to be a stronger Christian, so I'm going to follow this. And in my head, yes, we all know I have a weird head. In my head, it's the Forrest Gump moment where he's running and like everybody else starts running with him, right? And like they all just follow him back and forth across the United States, and you hear the history of it. Like that's kind of my moment. Paul's walking and I'll join you. I want to learn. I'll join. I want to learn. I'll join. I want to learn. Thank you. So we kind of have this moment, and then the most teachable moment that every pastor would want to have you hear. And if I ever refer to you as Eutychus, you'll understand why. So Paul and all these guys they're up in this room and they're talking and they're growing, and like it's like this intense Bible study, right? Like they're sitting there and they're sharing, and there's this young guy, Eutychus. And he's doing in my head, he's doing his best to stay awake. And Eutychus is sitting on the windowsill and he's listening to Paul. And the story goes in Acts here that Eutychus falls out of the window. He falls asleep listening to Paul preach, and he falls asleep and falls 3 stories down. And they go down there and they find out he's okay and all this. So to me, if nothing else, it's just that like nugget in there of don't fall asleep when somebody's talking about God. So every pastor wants you to hear, when I see you start kind of nodding off during a sermon, I can just be like, hey, Eutychus, wake up. Don't fall out of your chair and die, right? Like we'll bring you back to life kind of thing. But it's just that moment of understanding of just even in the midst of somebody like Paul preaching, there's a guy that just fell asleep and just fell out of the window. Like, I'm not saying you can have too much God, but at some point you got to sleep too, right? Like so I just find the humor in all of that, and it brings us to that question. Because all of those people are in a different part of their life. My question for you in this one is, what season of life are you in? Are you like Eutychus that's like, man, I'm trying to stay awake, God, but I don't get it, and you fall? Or are you like one of those guys that Forrest Gump moment, like just going, man, I just want to grow. I will literally give up everything to walk with you, Paul, because I see God in you. Are you willing to do that, right? Like we're all in different seasons of life. I look back at different points of my life, and you have all these conversations, right? Like I'm different now than I was in my 20s. In my 20s, I was dumb. I thought I was invincible. I've realized now, especially with all these doctor's appointments, that I'm very far from invincible, right? Like they had these mini motorbike, dirt bikes out here the other day, and Adam Sion and I were like, hey, let's get on these and ride. And Adam was flying through the parking lot, and I got on and I was like, okay, I'm going to go like 20 maybe. And I was like, okay, I better start slowing up. Got to turn around. And I sat there, and Jeff next door, he's like, come on, open that thing up. It'll do 50. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have a helmet anymore. I don't have, and I got off of it, and I was like, yeah, that was fun. And then I thought about my days on my motorcycle, where I had my old Suzuki 1100, and I was like racing friends through Midland, like going way too fast, weaving in and out of traffic. And I'm like, yeah, that season of life is over now. Now I'm on this little thing going, 25 feels really fast. I'm going to get off, right? Like we're all in a different season of life. We're all in a different point in our growth. We're all in this moment where we're just, and it's asking those questions, but it's also understanding that God has something for you in this season of life that's very different. So my question is, what season of life? Are you diving in to grow? Are you diving in to be something more like Christ? Or are you just kind of floating along like Eutychus, where you're just ready and like, hey, I'm here, but that's about as far as you're getting from me? What season of life are you in? So after this, Paul kind of starts his goodbyes. And I think that's important to understand in the season of life, that Paul really is understanding that his life is probably coming to an end. He's a lot older now. He's invested in Timothy. He's invested in all these younger guys. He's kind of like the Forrest Gump with the long beard, right? Like he has that different season of life going for him. And he's realizing that more and more people aren't happy with him. He just left Corinth, where there was a riot and people that wanted him dead because they've taken his livelihood. He's seeing that his time on this earth is coming to a close. And we have a different Paul, and it really starts to transition through this next little bit, 21 and 22, and also next week. We have a different Paul. We have Paul that has seen that, right? Like, I don't want to call out anybody by name, but older people here, right? Like, you start to see the season of life. Me in my 40s are different than me in my 20s. You start to see life differently. And Paul's starting to see life differently in his legacy that he's leaving behind in those things. And he's having those conversations with people. And he actually goes to some of these villages as he's leaving in these cities and says, I'm never going to see you again. Like, this is my last visit. This isn't, it's not easy to get around. These mountains, these hills, all this stuff, these boat rides are taking a toll on me. So I'm probably not going to come back, and enough people want me dead that it's probably going to happen one of these days. And we start to get into Acts 21. And he starts getting wind of these threats, and kind of a neat moment of, they're saying, don't go, Paul, don't go. They want you dead there. Don't go to this village. Don't go to that town. And this guy in this moment, because the wording, fancy Bible wording, and it pretty much says, whoever's wearing Paul's robe, the belt of Paul's robe, we will kill. And so this guy sits here and pulls Paul's robe belt off of him. And he pulls it off and he wraps it around his hands and his feet. And he says, here, I will take this. Like, pretty much saying, Paul, you are so important. I'm going to put your belt around my hands and my feet, and they can kill me because I'm the one wearing your belt, right? Like, I got him on a technicality. But it really shows the true love that this guy had, and going, Paul, you're so important. I love what you're teaching. And if it means that I have to die so that you can continue this ministry. And Paul's like, no. And he has this moment that I imagine where he sits and he goes, no, you got to understand, like, it's not about me, it's about growing. It's about God being seen. So if they kill me, grow. Don't take the death for me, but instead I need you to grow. I need, and right, like, that's the heart of this. That's the heart. As 2.5 years ago, as Jamie and I planted, and the board members here at One Church can attest to this. Pretty much every month we talk about the fact of, what if something happens to me and Jamie, this church has to go on. This can't continue to be us. It has to be bigger than this. You guys have to be bigger. Whether you land here at One Church or you go to another church, my hope is that you take this and you grow your faith. It's not about this building. It's not about me. It's about you guys growing. It's about us growing and letting people know about the love of God. And so it really gets into that. And Paul just says, I'm not afraid because God is there. And so Paul walks along and he gets taken into, and they capture him because there's so many people that are mad about what he's talking about and what he's doing. And Paul gets in front of the people and he says to them, hey, and he tells them about what happened to him on the road to Damascus and how he changed and how he used to hate Christians and how he wanted to have them killed. But now the growth that has happened, and he sits there, and the crowd, it says the crowd like listened intently to the first part of the story, and how Paul says how he changed his life. And then he changes and says, but this message that I have is for everybody. And all of a sudden the crowd turned on him again because they got angry. They got upset with the fact that, wait, what you're talking about it should only be for the chosen. It shouldn't be for that. And Paul's going, no, it's for everybody. That sentence right there, the power that must have been for Paul to share that. I've shared this before. It drives me crazy when churches say, we have it right and you have it wrong. But the power that Paul must have had to realize that he had the entire crowd empathetic to what he was saying about about the story of God and all of this. But he knew, as soon as I say it's going to be for everybody, it's not going to be for an elite group, it's not going to be for a few of you, he knew the entire crowd would want him dead at that moment. And he was still willing to say that. So my last question for you is, what is the worldly price of following God for you? I think that's one of the most difficult things for me to even share, right? Like, we in America and as Christians, we don't really face things that other countries face. Christians in other countries, literally sharing that you're a Christian will have you killed. Like, we don't have that. Yeah, we may get made fun of. People that don't understand, we may have that. But we really don't have a terrible worldly price for following God. Paul had a terrible worldly price for following God. He knew by saying that sentence that people would want him dead. That right there is crazy to me to think in Acts 21 and 22. Like, and they sit there and he sits, and then Paul, the end of 22, and we'll, because I don't want to leave it as like a cliffhanger going into the next week, which is our last week of this series. Paul goes into that entire conversation, and he sits there, and they capture him, they put him in chains, and they take him away, and Paul gets him kind of on a technicality because he's like, wait, do you not know, that I'm a Roman, which what you're doing is illegal. You can't tie up a Roman like this. I need to be under trial. And they're like, oh, crap, you are a Roman, aren't you? Yep, we need to let you go. And they set him free because the realization of all of that. But the entire story of how Paul did that, right? Like, he realized that God had something for him. He realized the power that he had by being a follower. And I think that's something that we take lightly as Christians. And I really want to encourage you today. I don't know the spot that each and every one of you are in your faith walk. I can guess that overall we have people in here that have been Christians their entire life. They don't know anything about that. And then there's probably here that people that are very new to this and are trying to fathom and trying to wrap their brain around what that even looks like. And I want you to understand that's the importance of why we went through Acts this week, or these weeks, is to understand that there's trials, there's things that that happened to Paul as he shared his faith that we're going to face. There's things that we can't, the world isn't going to understand. Why do you wake up and go to church on Sunday? It's much easier to just stay home and sleep. Why do you read your Bible? Why do you get into the Word? Why do you want to be a better Christian? It doesn't make sense from a worldly stance. But having a relationship with God is such a life changer that is why we do what we do, and that's why I do what I do. I've shared this many, many times before. In the middle of this church plant, there was lots of, okay, why are you doing what you do? And people that love Jamie and I and are very close to us, including family members, had that tough question with us. Why are you doing what you're doing? And there was many times that Jamie and I looked at each other and went, because God's made it clear. Like there's not a perfect answer for it, right? Like some of you in this room, I sat at your house, or you sat at my house, or we sat at lunch and we talked. Why? What's the why behind that? And it was because I know what God has done for me. And I couldn't continue on without sharing that with other people. And wanting to give a safe space for people to come and just grow in their faith. A place that we could just, as a group, to come and do life together and do life differently. In this space, that's what we're going to continue to be, and because we learn from Paul, and we learn from that, and we learn from asking those tough questions. And we learn by being more Christ-like and spurring each other on, and having a community and a space to do that. So really, and just in closing, I want to share with you the verse that of what I prayed years ago and what I went through, and it can be found in Romans 10:9 and 10. And if you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God. And it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. That is why we do what we do. That is why we meet. That's why we spur each other on. And that's why we want to reach a lost and hurting world. That's why we reach out and we do projects here at the church. That's why we do the food distribution. That's why we do the things that we do, because we have openly declared that we believe in God, and we want others to have that same relationship, because that relationship with God is life-changing. And I can't imagine going through life without a relationship with God, and I don't want anybody else to have to face that. Will you pray with me, won't you? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for being a God that loves us. Thank you for for helping us ask those tough questions. Thank you for being there when things don't make sense or we can't even fathom moving on without. Thank you for providing friends that encourage. Thank you for meeting us in the middle of those different seasons of life that we're in and walking us through that. Thank you for providing a place to worship in a fun atmosphere where we can have hot dogs and chips and reminisce about why the Lions should have been there. Thank you for being a God that meets us in all of those situations. It's in your name we pray. Amen.